thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
For the audience that is less familiar with your work, could you briefly introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name is Kate Edwards, and I am a geographer and a culturalization strategist, and I've been working in the video game industry for over 26 years now. And so effectively what I do with my background is I help game developers avoid making political and cultural mistakes in their game content, the kinds of things that get them in trouble in different countries around the world, either trouble with the government or trouble with the consumers who don't like the way something was shown. So that's the main part of my work. I've also been doing a lot of advocacy work in the game industry. So I ran the International Game Developers Association for 5 years. And then just as of recent, I'm now the executive director of the Global Game Jam event that happens every year in January.
Yeah, sounds like a really long career there. So as localization right now is gaining more terrain in the games industry, basically geographer is pioneering game culturalization. So could you tell us a little bit more about that? What's the difference between localization and culturalization, and why is it so important for game developers worldwide?
Absolutely. So, I think most of us know what localization is. Which for the majority of people in the industry, and I think in other industries too, localization means translation. It's basically about the language. So making sure that the language is compatible with different markets. Culturalization though, basically I'm looking at the perspective of not just language, because I leave that to the translators, because that's their expertise. My expertise as a geographer is to look at things that are not linguistic. So gestures, body language, symbology, character design, the use of history in a game, the use of political systems, religious systems, all of these other things that go into games and go into other media that typically, that's not the kind of thing you do in localization. You're basically trying to just translate the concept. What I'm trying to do is see if the concept and the creative vision of these games can actually work in other cultures, and not just linguistically, but in all the other aspects.
What would you say are the biggest pitfalls that game developers worldwide should try to avoid when it comes to culturalization? I'm pretty sure you've said "I told you so" a few times in your career.
Yeah, I've said that a lot to a lot of projects, but there's a lot of obvious ones. Like if you're going to put any real world religion in your game, you have to be extremely careful about how you portray that religion. Obviously, you want to be respectful. You want to be thinking about, basically that, treating it properly, and the people who practice it treat it properly. Now, of course, sometimes the game narrative requires you to do something that might show them in a negative way. That's okay, but then you have to understand the repercussions of that, because the people who practice that faith, for example, may not like the way you're showing them. And so you're going to have to be prepared. So often religion and politics are big issues. The use of history is often a really tricky one, because in some countries, the perception of history is different. So I worked on all the Age of Empires games, for example, and we actually had to change one historical scenario for Korea, because the Korean government said that it didn't happen that way. Even though that's what history tells us, that's how it happened. So we had to change it for the Korean market. The other thing, of course, too, is with character design, it's the use of stereotypes. Happens all the time. Sexual, gender stereotypes, racial stereotypes, national stereotypes. Like when you have, we're going to put a Scottish person in this game, and they're going to wear a kilt, and they're going to have red hair, they're going to eat haggis and play the bagpipes, and all these kind of really over-the-top things that are perceived as Scottish. And now, if the narrative requires that, then obviously you have a reason for it, but a lot of times it doesn't require that kind of thing. And so those are just some of the really basic things that I often try and get them to think about, as they're making the game and creating these characters.
Changing a little bit of topic, you gave a talk recently at Gamescom about changing the perception of games and game creators. And why do you think that, despite being one of the most innovative branches of the entertainment business, the games industry is still struggling till today with a lot of negative perception from the public?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think the main reason is because the game industry, as successful as it has been, and it's very successful, financially and otherwise, what we have done a really poor job as game creators is we don't engage the public. So we don't talk to them about us as an art form and as a cultural force. And so they see us a lot of times as sort of like a product, like something they buy and we entertain them, and then they just walk away from it. And especially we don't engage politicians really well. A lot of people around the world, a lot of game developers complain that this politician doesn't understand games and that government won't give us money. And it's like, well, when's the last time you invited them to play games? When's the last time you invited them to come to your studio and you can tell them what you do and you can show them what you do and educate them on what game development is? And I don't think we do nearly enough of that. And if you compare it to the film industry, I don't think they have this problem because, for one, they've been around a lot longer. But two, I think most of the public, they understand how films are made. There's even a lot of movies about making movies. And so it's not a mystery to the public, whereas game development is a big mystery to a lot of people. They have no idea how games get made. They don't know the people who make games. They don't know the great, the growing diversity we have in game creators, all the kinds of topics that we address. They're not all violent shooter games like a lot of people think. And I think part of the problem is when we don't engage the public, when we don't actively engage politicians, and then the media as well, they are very quick to use a stereotype of who we are and what we do, and we don't fight it. We don't fight it very often. We just kind of like, yeah, there they go again. They're just talking bad about us like they always do. Why don't we stand up and say something? I don't understand. And so a lot of this, I feel, falls on us within the industry to be much more vocal about it.
You've been a fierce advocate for diversity in the gaming industry. Do you think the lack of diversity in the game development could have somehow indirectly contributed to some of the negative perception we're still experiencing today?
I do. I think there's a direct correlation. The fact that when we have poor representation of women in the industry, poor representation of people of color, it does feed this narrative that games are primarily made by white men for white men. Now we know that on the game player side that's not true. We know that gameplay is pretty much a ubiquitous form of entertainment around the world. We know that there's more women who play games than men in a lot of places. We know for a fact that there's, for example, more women in their 30s and 40s who play games than teen males. And which, even when you say that statistic to the public, I've had people tell me that's wrong. They say, I don't believe that. That's crazy. How could that be? Like, well, that's the fact. I mean, we're the industry. We know this, but they get fed the image in the media that the typical gamer is a teenage boy in his mom's basement, and so that kind of ongoing, falsehood is something that we don't fight against. But I think part of the reason too is because when we don't have diversity represented in the workplace, we're not making games that address, the whole wide audience out there who might like other things other than shooters and all that kind of thing. We're seeing that change though. I mean, that is changing because a lot of indie developers, independent developers, they basically a lot of these people are self-taught, and the democratization of game tools, where a lot of the tools are free now, the knowledge is free online, and so a lot of people are self-taught. And so I've met people all around the world, very diverse cultures, very diverse races and so on, who are now getting into game development. And so I do see us starting to see that shift. But the core industry, like the AAA, big companies, all that kind of stuff, they still need to do a lot of work to improve their diversity, because ultimately what we want to see is that those who make games better represent those who play games, because we already know those who play games are pretty diverse.
What about the players? Is there something the players can or should do to help with this perception, or does this lay totally on the game developers to address?
I think in the community space, like the community of players and also the community of developers, but like looking on the consumer side with the players, one of the biggest things players can do is just learn to be nice. Be nice to each other, because you have people who come into a gaming community. Why are they there? Because they love the game. And that's something everyone in that community shares. That's the reason why they're there. And so when we have toxicity in communities online, for all kinds of reasons, it's strange that why would you have toxicity in a community of the same game when everyone's there with a mutual love of the game. And so when we have these people who come into the community and become disruptive and they say things that are inappropriate or racist or sexist or whatever it might be, that's where the company, the game developer, does have a responsibility, I feel, to step in and ensure that the community is safe. That's what they should do. That's what they should do. They should foster a very positive, open community. And so there's various things that developers can do to help that. And so it really is both sides. I mean, we need companies to have the tools in place that help them create a safe community, but at the same time, we need to encourage players to be nice. And we need to make them accountable for their behavior. So if they're not going to be nice and they're going to be disruptive, then we need to be quicker about just getting them out of the community. You know, and I mean, most gaming communities out there have very clear rules. These are the terms of service. These are the rules of engagement in the community. But unfortunately, I don't think those are always enforced very well.
Yeah, so we definitely need to do a better job at enforcing.
We do. And we also need to find better tools to scale the enforcement, because when you're thinking about like any company, they've got a small team of people and even a large team of people who are handling the community management, but still that large team is nothing compared to the millions of players that play their game. And so you have to somehow scale the ability to monitor the community.
If you were to give one piece of advice to someone looking to get a career in gaming, what would that be?
So it's one piece of advice with two parts.
Great.
So there's the first piece of advice is, if you want to get into the game industry, then you should already be making games. So like I mentioned before, the tools are out there. Unity is free, Unreal is free. There's a lot of instruction that's available out there. A lot of schools today in different countries teach game design or some aspect of game design. So the knowledge is there. If someone comes to me and says, I really want to be a game designer, so I ask them, how many games have you made yet? I haven't made any. I'm like, well, you know what? I wonder if you want to be a game designer, because oftentimes when you meet a musician, for example, like I want to be a concert violinist in an orchestra, they already play the violin and they already practice. Or if they want to be a writer, they say, I want to be a successful novelist, they're already writing, you know? And so it's like you have to do it if you want to actually become that profession. So that's really important. And there's a lot of ways to do that. I mean, like I said, you could teach yourself. You could join a local developer group. Oftentimes there's local meetups of indie developers or other people. You could just go talk to them and find out how did they get into the game industry, what was their path. So that kind of leads to my second point, is like you also need to network, and you need to connect yourself with the community, because one of the things I love about the game development community is that everyone is so open and so nice, and we all want to share this mutual love of creating games, and it's very rare to not find that. And so, you know, for people who might be shy, because I know a lot of people who want to work in games are shy, they're introverts. I'm an introvert too. I can fake like I'm an extrovert, like I'm doing right now. But you know, you have to kind of fight through that shyness and actually reach out to these people, because you have to remember, all the other people who work in games are shy too, because they just want to work on their games. So you have to network, because that's how you get jobs in this industry. You don't get jobs by sending resumes to companies. You get jobs by talking to people at that company and showing them what you can do, and finding mentors who are more experienced and showing them your skills. And so pretty much every person I know in this industry who's gotten a job, it was usually through some kind of connection or networking. And I know it's hard for people, because you know, if they're shy or they're not confident in their skills, they don't want to show people, but that's the only way you can move forward, is to have the courage to show people your work.
Thank you very much, Kate. This was wonderful.
Thank you very much.